today we're going to use this Dream Big leaf pattern by Hoffman, and we're going to be using version 5 of Quilt Path with eClipse. We're going to be keeping things in areas, keeping things out of areas. And then I'm also going to show you how to set multiple designs at once so that you sew them all at once, but you set them separately. So to start out with, we're going to do keep out. So in the purple and pink area coming over to this orange area, I want a pantograph. And then in the orange area, I'm going to put separate designs. And then in this yellow area, I want to keep a pantograph in this area. So we're going to keep out here, do something called multi-placement for these leaves, and then keep in with eClipse in the center. So we're going to select our pattern, and the one that I want to do is messy braid. It's just a pantograph that I have. I measured the width with my ruler, and then for the height, I made it about a square because I know these patterns are printed to be a square. So the next thing I need to do is change my height of my design because I want it a little bit denser than it was originally brought in at. The beauty of using Power Panto is that it's going to lock your aspect ratio, and as it resizes things, it's going to keep your shapes in the right shape. So in this case, when I put 5 in, it added repeats to make sure that my design stayed the right size. It will also, bleed things off the edge and just cut them off to keep those aspect ratios correct. So you don't have to think about any of that. Quilt Path is doing that for you. I am going to zoom in though so that you can see this next part. If you focus in right here, you're going to notice that my designs from one row to the next are touching. That is pretty typical when you're using Power Panto. And most of the time I need to increase my vertical spacing. You may have to decrease it too at times, but I would say probably 95% of the time we're increasing it. So I'm going to increase it until it looks right. And on most designs, it's somewhere in the 2 to 3, a 0.2 to point, let's say 3.9 area that I end up in that I like. So I actually like the way that it looks here at 0.3. So I would, at that point, say I was done. I'm going to hit fit to get my display area the correct size, and then I'm going to close zoom. And then I want to save this pantograph. So I can either hit save up here on the top, the little disc, or there's a save pano button. Now, I've saved this a couple times from filming, so I know that this is the pantograph that I'm doing, and I'm not going to save it again because I've already got it saved multiple times. We've had some filming issues. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit cancel, but you do want to save yours, right? And the same thing is going to go in just a second when I hit sew in zones. I know that I have the saved zones. So it's going to tell me I would want to save them. I would say yes, and then I'm just going to click on the one I already did and hit save, right? And it's going to ask me if I want to overwrite in this case because I've saved it a couple times today. On this next screen, here is the important part of this. You want to set your design before you do anything else. So you want to make sure your design is where you want it to be. So I'm going to come right here and say, this is where I want my design to place. And I'm going to hit that A button and it's going to place my design. My system is currently set up using something called 4-point. So I have 4 points that I can choose to set with. I'm only going to use the A. So I'm setting off the top left, just like in version 4 if I was using the top left flag. By default, Quilt Path will do a center set. So if I go into Zone Manager, this top button, you can see mine says 4-point. I can change that to center, and that is what the default is. I personally like my tape on the outsides so that when I get done with my quilt, that tape can still be there. If you're using the center point, a lot of times you end up quilting over your tape, or you end up pulling off the tape because it's going to be sewn over. Personally, I want my tape there after the quilts come out, so the first thing I did was change my zone to center placement. I didn't do anything with the middle ones. That is, starting the zone on the left every single time. When I tack my quilts off, I tend to sew up the right side and then the left side, so I'm already on the left side at the beginning of every zone. So I left that one the same because that's the most logical for my workflow. And then on this bottom one, I'm going to change this to sewing continuously. Right now it's going to sew left to right, jump stitch, right to left, jump stitch, left to right, jump stitch. I don't want it to do that. I want it to sew left to right, sew down the side, come back right to left, sew down the side. So I did change that bottom one, and I'm going to say okay. Now it's going to make me replace the pattern. The reason I place the pattern first every time, even if I have to replace it a second time, is that if I don't, I'll do something like go to the marking tool or go to eClipse and do something that has to be reset, right? So I try to do it at the beginning, even if I end up going back and doing it a second time. Now you can see it has optimized everything out. It's actually going to come up and sew from here around the corner. There was a jump stitch that was kind of diagonal there to begin with. And it's going to mend things like that if you let it sew through the clip zones. Now I'm actually ready to take care of my clips. My safe area goes from about here down to here. So I know that these points are inside of here, and I don't want them quilting on there, right? The whole idea behind this is I want this as a background, but the inside where my leaves are, I don't want quilted. I'm going to take care of that by going to plugins up here on the top right and choosing Pattern eClipse. Pattern eClipse is new in version 5. It is a gold feature, which in Quilt Path you get the gold features. So the button stays gold, but it's not a big deal. And you can see that I actually did this once before, which is fine. I haven't moved my quilt. And because I did all this work before, I can actually just say okay, and it would let me go ahead and use that design. Let me show you real quick how to do that. What has happened is that I was doing this earlier and we found out we didn't have any sound going into our video, so we had to redo the entire video. But I have not moved my quilt. All I've done is restarted filming for you. So coming back in, it has all of my marks. Now, I also went back and went out of this, went into the marking tool, and made sure that these actually are in the right place. They are. And this is a lot of work. So I am going to let this stay where it is, and we're going to quilt it. And when we get to the bottom of the quilt and I need to eclipse at the bottom end, I'm going to go ahead and film it at that point so that you can see what I'm doing. But just know you do have to go around and mark these, or, use the eclipse and add points. I'm just going to cheat since it's in here and it's a lot of work, and then we'll show you how to do it at the bottom. What we want to do is show you real quick how we check to make sure that it actually is still in the same place. I came down and started marking. If I go to plugins and I go to marking tool, right? I just use this to make sure that it's in the right place. So I started out by roughly following my leaves and making sure that it's cutting where it's supposed to, guys. And this is just absolutely amazing me, and it's making me very, very happy, right? Because it means if you make a mistake and you have to start over, you didn't place your design and you have to start over, that eClipse is holding where that is. So when you go back into eClipse, it's going to cut the part of the design it needs to cut out, as opposed to if I had it set way over here, it would be cutting like that zone out, right? And you're moving the whole zone. You need it all to reposition, and it does. And I didn't know it did that, and that's brilliant. Once you have it looking the way you want it to, you are going to let it sew. Now, you're going to have a big old jump stitch that goes over here for some reason. And I want to see if I can figure out why that's happening. So let's go ahead and go back into our plugins for just a second and back to eClipse. And what I want to do is I think I need to drop this corner down. So that would be over here. I would need to add a point. See how it just dropped down a little bit? I'm going to add another point here. so that I'm getting the entire orange line underneath the green line. And then I'm going to say okay and see if that jump stitch will go away for me. So now I'm actually ready to quilt. So I personally like to do toolbox and then do move to start point. And then it's going to tell me that I am not near the location. See that where the little asterisk is up here? This is something that's unique to Quilt Path. And what we ask them for is a way for things to move quicker. So instead of it slowly dragging your machine back to this point, it's going. So our row is done and it immediately releases your carriage, which is different than version 4. And you're going to end your stitching. So I've pushed it away, grabbed my top thread, do needle up, needle down, right? Pull away again. And then the second pull away is how long your bobbin thread is for the next pull. So you want to move it 6 to 8 inches away. Okay, now we're ready to finish. So we're going to hit, we're finished our zone, and it's going to ask you, have you completed sewing this zone? This includes pulling the bobbin thread and making any needed repairs. This will also clear all pattern eClipse, so it's going to, the place that we cut out is going to be cleared, and if we have, then we're going to say yes. The difference between version 4 and 5 is that Quilt Path is now going to move your head for you. So you have a choice of doing this automatically or manually, but the idea behind this is that you want to find the next location. So I'm just going to do automatic for it and have it come to the position it needs to be for the next point. I'm going to use my handy dandy orange tape and put it down and then needle down through it. Now that is my what they call 2A. It's actually the point right here. I can have it do another mark. So if I wanted to do another mark, I can tell it I want it to do the previous mark. I want to do the mark over there, right? And it's going to say to manually move your machine. It's unlocked my carriage. I'm going to move my machine over close to where I think that red asterisk is going to be. Remember the red asterisk from earlier? And then I'm going to say okay. So anytime your machine is more than 2 feet from from your goal, right, it's going to ask you to manually move your machine. And then I'm going to take my orange tape again and put it under here, and it's locked in place. So I'm just going to needle down, needle up, right, and tell it that to continue. I've done the number of marks I want to do. It's going to say, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. And now the machine's going to move back the distance it thinks it needs to go for the next zone to go in. So I'm going to say okay, and it's going to move towards the back of my quilt. And lock it into place. Okay, then I'm going to take my side elastics off. We use pins to put ours on. And we're going to do the other side, and then we're going to forward the quilt back until this tape is underneath that foot. Okay, so you just need to get it close. Once you have it there, you're going to say okay. And have I moved the fabric? Yes, I have. Okay, and it's going to get ready for the next zone to sew. So we need to sew everything down, sew our quilt top back down to the surface of our backing, and we will be back. So now we're going to do pattern eClipse on the bottom half of the quilt. So I'm going to go to pattern eClipse. Because Quilt Path holds the eClipse in there in relationship to the safe area, if I had started this on the same day, you would actually see my orange eClipse in here. I've actually shut my system down and this is day 2, so you are not seeing it. It's like I've
gone in first thing because this is first thing in the morning. So I need to make sure that I have my settings the same, which I do. And then I'm going to start adding points. So I'm going to reposition the camera so that you can see the points. So now we're going to start adding points to our eClipse. So this is one of those times that, you know, I'm on a Milli 30 and this is way far back. So when you're going to be doing eClipse, you really want to consider having your design closer to you, to be quite honest. So I'm using a laser light so I don't have to sneak my needle down. And I'm using a finger mouse. That being said, I will tell you, I would be a lot more comfortable doing this if it was a lot closer to me. So I am going to sit here and very carefully start doing this. And I mean, you want to be close to where it's going to stitch partially on these lines. So I try really hard not to be really critical of what I'm doing, right? But I also want it to look good when I get done. So I am taking my time and trying to get this exactly where I want it to go. And now I'm coming into that dark part where it's really hard to see where my design is. I'm trying to get where the points need to turn. Like I need a point, either an inner point or an outer point. Those are the points that I'm really trying to hit. And I could get around this completely by echoing this ever so slightly instead of trying to stay right on the line. I'm not sure if you can see it. I'm going to zoom up for just a second so you can see my screen and see what I'm seeing on my screen. And you can see how far I've gotten so far. Let's go up just a little bit more. I think you can see the orange now, right? It's always hard videotaping a screen. And then I'm going to scroll back down again, and we're going to keep going. And I want to zoom back out again so that you can see more. I know it's hard to see with my handle there. Kind of have to have my handle where it's comfortable. I can try to pull it up a little bit and see if I can get underneath it a little more. I have a feeling that even with my hand being there, it's going to block what you can see, but we'll do what we can. This is one of those things that would be a great time for me to actually have like a GoPro on. I'm going to do back. I'm not happy with how I just traced that. So I'm going to go back a little bit, remember to hit my add button so that I can keep using my mouse, or I would keep deleting what I did. I was going on the wrong line. I was going down a vein instead of going down the edge of my leaf. And what I'll do, I actually have another machine coming in next week. And what I will do is film the same process on that as far as doing something that I need to go around like this. It may not be another big leaf, because this is a whole lot of work getting this to look where I want it, the way I want it to look, right? So, and I'm going back out. There we go. The other thing I will tell you is plan for breaks when you're doing this. So as long as your machine is sitting right where it is, you can pick it up again later. So I am needing to have breaks so that I can readjust my camera and do things like that, answer phone calls, do all those good things that we have to do. But definitely plan to have a couple breaks when you're doing this, if you're doing a lot of this in a row, because it takes a lot of concentration and it takes a lot of muscle memory as far as moving the machine. Okay, and hopefully you won't be doing what I'm doing and like leaning over a tripod when you're doing it. Try to do it as ergonomically correct as you can to keep yourself as comfortable as you can. And this part is going to be a little bit easier for me to see where I need to stop because I can see where it stitched the echo on the original place. So I can see where it's stitching, so I know I can stop there. And then if I scroll up, and you should be able to see that I've got a complete space. Once again, it's really important for you to have your orange line outside of your green area, that green square that we talk about all the time, right? So the orange line needs to be outside of the green box if your shape was in the other part of your zone, right in the zone above or below it. And sometimes, like in this case, I did a big area and I told you it would have been closer. I could have set my safe area much smaller and cut my leaf area into 3, which would have been easier, to be honest with you, as far as the marking part of it. And in that case, my zone on the middle probably would have had a line at the top and the bottom, and both of those lines would have needed to be outside of my zone for it to be able to stitch correctly. Now we need to mark the next row. So I'm going to do the end of my stitching because we need to do that before we hit finished zone now. I'm gonna get my scissors. Okay, and I'm gonna tell it I've finished my zone. It's gonna give me the message to make sure that I have completed my zone, that I've pulled my bobbin thread up and everything, and I have, so I'm gonna say yes. And then it's going to move to my 2A point, and I'm going to slide this under here and stick it down and then stitch through it. And I could also mark my 2B point, which is on the other side. Or actually, this would be 3A. This is your A point and your B point, right? I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna mark the A. But what I am gonna do is not finish sewing, okay? So I have only probably about 6 inches left on the bottom of this quilt, like, 6 inches. So I'm gonna roll up and do the center of the quilt, and then I will come back to pantograph. This is saved. It's saved my zones, right? So the last thing I'm gonna do on this quilt is quilt this fauna row. I could do this any way I wanted to, right? In any order I want to. And that's what I'm kind of trying to show you, is that you can jump around in here a little bit based on how you think you need to do that quilt at that moment. So I want to go ahead and keep quilting and show you what I'm going to do on the top part of the zone, or in the center of the quilt. So we're going to do that real quick. So I stepped through getting the new mark put on there, and where it would tell me to go ahead and sew the sides of my quilts. It moved the machine back, and I am getting ready to get out of pantograph. You can see that I've moved my quilt so that the 2 areas that I have not quilted yet, inside the yellow part and outside of the orange part that I'm not quilting yet, both of those are underneath my needle. And I've made it so that this yellow part is way down in my safe area, because I'm going to be doing a whole lot of marking around that flower. And I want to make sure that it's easy to mark, right? That it's close to me. So now if you look at my screen, you're going to see that I'm still in pantograph. So I've saved my zones. I'm just going to close out of this, and I'm going to set up a new pantograph. So I'm going to go back to the home screen, and then I'm going to go back into pantograph, okay? And this is bringing up the pantograph section again. And I am going to set this up as a pantograph. And what I want to do is set up the size of my block. So I'm going to go a little bit out. I need to do the safe area first. So I'm going to do that by locking my channel lock onto the outside of my point, wrong channel lock, right? So that I'm just barely clearing that point. I'm going to do a little bit farther out than that, just because I don't want to have a problem. And I'm going to reset my safe area by going into the toolbox and then saying I want to reset my safe area. Okay, so yes, I know I'm going to have to start again when I do this. So I'm going to go straight up on my quilt, and I'm going to try to make sure that I can clear this point, right? So I'm setting my safe area really close so that this is going to be very big on my screen. So that's going to be my top left. I'm going to release that. I'm going to do the same thing over here, so I only have to guess in one I'm only guessing in height, right? For my safe area, I'm not guessing in width. So I moved it over, locked my channel lock again, so it'll only move forward, and then I'm going to bring it forward and mark my bottom right. And this is going to give me a much tighter safe area. Go back into pantograph. Okay, unlock this so you can see what I'm working on. Okay, so we're looking at, it's just a little bit bigger than 16 inches square, guys. Okay, so the next thing I want to know is how big my pantograph needs to be. So I can go ahead and just set it up to fill my whole safe area. And the reason is that I have set it really tight, first of all, and second of all, I'm going to be doing keep in. So I'm going to be keeping this pantograph into the space it is. So let's see how this would work if I was doing, I want to do circles, I want to do little teeny weeny pebbles, and I'm going to use a design that's commercially available. You just ignore where I'm going because, you know, my stuff will not be the same place. I'm actually going to move this so it's in front of me so I can read it. I think it's going to be under texture. So the one that I want to use is one called Circle Play. So if you can see that, it's right now telling me that it's 5 inches tall, so it's got about 3 rows. And I can look on this and say, I've got some teeny weeny little 1/4 inch bubbles, but these big ones are 2.5 inches tall. I want those to be a little bit smaller. So I am going to change my pattern height to 4. Okay, so now they're all under 1 inch. I want this to be really, really small, so I'm gonna actually go with that. It may still be a little bit bigger than I want. I haven't stitched this out at this size before, but we're gonna see how it looks. The other thing I'm gonna do, because some of those are about 1/8 of an inch now, is when I look at when you look down at my milli, my stitch length, I'm gonna crank this all the way up, guys. Right, so it's gonna do 15 stitches to the inch, and that's gonna give me the smallest, the best chance of really smooth circles when I get to those teeny weeny little circles. Okay, so this is a time you wanna make sure your tension is right to begin with. You don't wanna find out you have a tension issue stitching little teeny weeny circles at, you know, 15 stitches to the inch. That's not a time you wanna be using your seam ripper, right? Okay, so do make sure that you've got it the size you want it before you get there, and then we're gonna see how this looks. It may, like I said, it could be a little bit bigger than I want. I'm thinking I probably even want it smaller than this, but we're gonna go with it and see how we all like it together. And if I wanted it smaller, the next time I quilt one of these, I'll make it smaller. But I'm not gonna pick it out at this point, right? Because it is for a class sample, and sometimes things, you know, when we're doing class samples, it's also to give us an idea of what we like and what we don't like, right? So we're gonna go with it. When we're gonna tell it we wanna sew in zones, it will send it as one zone, and that's fine. I could also do it, you know, I could do it to quilt as a single pattern. Either way is gonna work in this case. I just don't wanna distort it. Do I wanna save the zone pattern? Yeah, it would be a good idea to save the zone pattern. So I'm going to say, I'm just gonna name it 1, like I did before, because it puts it at the top of my list, and then put a space and do the word center. Right, so that I know what it is. So I've got my 1 center saved, but I was a bad person and I didn't save the first one. So I am gonna save this one, and then as weird as it sounds, I'm gonna close out because I forgot to save my pantograph. Okay, now I want to put a mark on my screen because I want to see where this big shape is on my screen. I just really need to know where the points are though. So I'm going to do plugins and do the marking tool. I'm going to add a mark. That's the top of my design. And what I'm really concerned about is where the tips are. So I'm just adding marks on the tips of my design. So it's going to make a big hexagon on my screen, or maybe an octagon. I think it's an octagon. I didn't count the points, guys, so it's an octagon all day long. Okay, so what I'm really concerned about is where the top and the bottom are. Right, so I can say okay, because I can see enough of it to know if it's going to place correctly, and then I can tell it, place it here, right? And that's not going to be right, so let's go ahead and it's not giving me enough of my design. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and go out of here, and we're going to do quilt as a single pattern instead of quilted zones, because if I can quilt this as one thing, I want to. So I'm going to do quilt as a single pattern. It's going to tell me it's outside of the safe area and it's going to be clipped, so I'm going to say okay and say okay again. Okay, and then I'm going to say okay on that message too. Thank you very much, Quilt Path, right? Okay, so it is, the quilted zones the quilt as a single pattern I did not like because it was gonna have to do it in 2 zones. This one, I still think I'm gonna have to place it. So hopefully my center is gonna be pretty close to where I need it to go. So I'm gonna do 1 point and I'm gonna do center, right? And then I'm gonna tell it, yep, that's where I want you to be. And it's gonna say, okay. And it's gonna clip anything on the outside, which is perfect in this case, right? Because everything, all of the little bubbles on the outside are not going to be quilted anyways. So that's gonna work great in my case. Now I want to eclipse. So I'm gonna come up here and do plugins. Oh. This is going to be something that happens to other people too, because I just hit plugins in this part of the program and I can't get where I need to go here, right? So this is pattern placement. You get no movement plugins in here, right? An eClipse is a movement plugin. So it's one that has to be used with robotics, right? So I actually want to hit quilt first. Now, in the last program, when you hit quilt, it would start sewing in placement. In this one, it doesn't. It is going to take you to quilting interface, which is quilt motion, right? And then when we go to plugins, we will get eClipse, okay? So, you know, we're all still learning the program a little bit and we have things that we used to do. Now, you're gonna see that it still has my old zone over here. That's fine, I just wanna hit this multiple hexagon clear, that's clear all, and it's gonna take away my eClipse that I was working on just a minute ago when I did the bottom part of the pantograph. And now I want to go ahead and start marking my zone. And I am gonna start marking, well, let's start marking here so that I'm close to you. Eventually I'll have to move my camera so that I can do the other side, but right now I can mark my first one. You see the little orange dot. And I can very carefully try to go around my leaf. So now I have my space marked, or my eClipse done for this, and I'm okay with it. It's still a little probably bigger than I'd want it, but to be honest with you, I think it's gonna be okay. So I'm going to change this to keep in. And what that's gonna do is if I hit preview, it's gonna take a minute, but it's going to cut this so that we can see what it'll look like on keep in. Now, it is gonna stitch over some of these places multiple times. And in this case, I think I actually want it to stitch around the eClipse border as well. So I am gonna tell it to go ahead and sew around the eClipse border. And when you hit preview, it should show you the difference, right? That you'll actually see it's gonna stitch completely around. So some of these areas are going to be stitched multiple times, and that's okay with me. I would prefer that it confine my stitching inside, and I actually think it looks a lot better this way on the screen. So let's see what it looks like when we quilt it. Oops. So we're just gonna say, okay. And it's gonna clip my pattern. And it's gonna take a minute. This is a lot of data for this to handle, right? You're talking many hundred, possibly even over 1,000 data points that it has to calculate. It's going to take a moment to do this. So this is the shape that it cut out with the outline stitching around the design. Okay, so that is the center of it. So this is keep in, keep out, right, on the outside, keep in on the inside. And then on these, I want to do something called multi-placement. So I'm going to show you that in another video. But before I can say that I'm done with this video, I still need to do that very last row. So I am going to get ready to move my quilt again. And then I need this all the way forward as far as it'll go so that I know where to end that very last row. Okay, and now I just need to sew down the bottom of the quilt. Okay, so now I have everything stitched down on the bottom of the quilt. I'm back at the bottom where I need to redo my, oops, did not mean to do that, where I need to redo my pantograph. So I'm going back into the pantograph section and I need to go ahead and reset my safe area because I need it to be wider. So I'm going to go to the ruler toolbox, reset my safe area. I know I'm going to have to redo it. That's cool. And I want to set my safe area bigger than what I think I need to quilt, but I still only want to do it at the bottom zone, right? So the bottom of my quiltable space. So it's going to come in looking kind of long and skinny when I get done, right? Because I only have about 6 inches left to quilt. So I am going to go ahead and bring my pantograph back in. So I'm going to read my pantograph and I'm going to read one leaf that I was doing earlier. And then I'm going to come over here and tell it I want to resume my sewing session for one leaf. And that I only want to do the bottom of it. So I'm going to come down. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to redo how I'm doing this real quick. We're going to stop that. I'm going to reset my safe area to the whole area for a minute. Okay, so we're going to reset the safe area for the entire measurement, right? Tell it I want to go back into pantograph, read the pattern that we were doing, so one leaf, and then resume our sewing session for one leaf, and we should have the same cuts that we had earlier. And I'm going to zoom in and zoom out because yep, that was just a graphics issue, right? So if I go down one, I have number 2, and then what I need to actually quilt is zone number 3. Okay, so I'm going to say that's what I want to quilt. No, I don't need your assistance in moving this. Thank you very much, right? So now I'm going to come over and place off of the tape, whoops, that I made earlier. Okay, and I'm going to bring this back up so that you can see my screen again. Okay, the last thing I want to do is make sure that this is falling where I want it to, and I can pretty much tell it is, but let's go ahead and look at it anyways. I'm going to use the marking tool real quick and add some marks. Just so that I can make sure that we're staying where we want to. And I can tell that we are already, because that's the edge right there. So we're gonna be fine. So I'm going to just remove all, I don't need those marks anymore. I just wanted to double check that I really was gonna be okay, which I am. So now I can try to optimize this, but most of the time I found if it shows a diagonal line like that, it just needs to be there. So let's check and make sure. You can try auto reverse. Well, auto reverse will actually take it off in this case. So let's go ahead and auto reverse it and just tell it we want to remove all. And then say, okay, so it's now going to start over here. That doesn't matter to me. I did change my stitch length back, right? Because I had shortened my stitch length for the center of the quilt, but I don't really need to have it shortened for here. So we are going to look down at the quilt a little bit so you can see what's going on. Right. And I'm going to move over to here, just say okay on the screen I'm on, and tell it to move to my start point, which it's going to happily do in just a second. And I'm going to needle down, needle up. And hit sew. And it's going to go merrily on its way.